This is the only video you need when it comes to defenses and kickers in the fantasy football playoffs. First, I'll go over my top defensive streamers for week 15 specifically. Then I'll go into my official list of defenses we need to stash for the entirety of the playoffs week 15 through 17 and finish out the video with my total defensive rankings of 15 as well as my kicker rankings in total. So we have a lot of important information coming in this one. If you do appreciate this video and want to be generous today, hit that like button. It helps me out a ton, but I don't waste your time. The first defense we're going to be streaming in week 15 is the Commanders. Outside of me being a fan and possibly the Commanders jersey you can see in the back there, they get a really good matchup and a must-start one. First things first, they cut Emmanuel Forbes a couple weeks ago. That's one less issue to worry about. But on the other side of this, we do have Marshon Lattimore returning back into the lineup for this matchup in his debut game against his old team in the Saints. You can expect he's going to try to do everything he possibly can to hold his old team to absolutely nothing. And when you look at the other team, it's not like he has to try very hard because we're likely not going to have Derek Carr in this matchup, putting Jake Haener as the number one quarterback with absolutely no wide receiver help. We don't have Chris Olave. We don't have Rashid Shaheed. Juwan Johnson is their top receiver right now outside of Marquez Valdes-Scantling. But if that's going to be the one matchup of Marshon Lattimore, Cedric Tillman is the second best wide receiver. That is not going to be an issue. The Saints turn over the ball at a decent amount, and they're not the most exotic offense that you have to scheme up. The Commanders are coming off their bye week as well, so with that, a pretty good coaching staff and coming off their bye, this should be one where they put up a good amount of points, and you don't have to worry too much about them busting and not putting any points up in your team. The Cardinals is another defense, though, that we can stream because of their absolute amazing matchup here against the Patriots and Drake May, who are one of the most turnover-prone teams in the NFL. He's averaging about 1 interception a game, and the offense is one of the most low scoring in the NFL, whether that's his fault, the offensive line's fault, the wide receiver options. It's all bad. The Cardinals defense is actually a little bit more decent than people give them credit for. I will be going over them a little bit more in depth in the total week 15 rankings, so make sure to stick around for that, but they're also a pretty decent stash defense that have some good matchups coming. Again, I'll get into all of that later, but the Falcons, surprisingly, is another decent streamer that we can look for week 15. Almost all of the top defenses this week are getting really tough matchups, so we have to look a little bit lower to these defenses that are more mid-tier, but do have really good ones, and the Falcons is that. They do get a matchup against the Raiders, which is very positive despite the Falcons letting the Vikings go for 42 points in them last week. The only thing is that offense is the complete opposite of what we have with the Raiders. No one's going to stop Justin Jefferson, let alone everybody else in this offense. We're not going to have Aiden O'Connell in this lineup. It's possible that he does play, but I think it is a long shot. That's going to be putting Desmond Ridder at the starting quarterback position. That's not anything we have to worry about as far as the defense goes. That should answer enough of your questions right there. The Falcons aren't the best internal unit. They have been allowing a good amount of points. They force some turnovers, but nothing really stands out as far as their defensive prowess in this matchup. But the next team here, someone that you can consider as a streaming option, a bit more of a dart throw if you do need it, you really just have no options here, is the Jets. They are a little bit hit or miss, but when they hit, they absolutely hit. They've had 4 games over 12 fantasy points this year, but they've also had 2 games where they put up negative fantasy points. Like, those are 2 completely different sides of the coin, but the history shows for this Jets defense in top matchups against really bad offenses, they perform a lot. They get the Jaguars this week, which also fits that narrative here. We're not going to have Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones at quarterback. We have Sauce Gardner on this roster who is going to be covering Brian Thomas Jr. That's really the only issue here. The rest of the guys, okay, we have Parker Washington and we have Evan Ingram. That's the only guys you have to worry about. And the good thing about the Jets defense, their pass defense is absolutely amazing. That's all we really have to worry about with this Jaguars team. They always play from behind, but Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby isn't necessarily the most dynamic running back duo, especially with the offensive line that they're running behind. So the strengths with the Jets look to fit pretty good with the weaknesses of the Jaguars. But again, the Jets have been all the way around the spectrum as far as their consistency goes. But here are the top defenses we need to stash for the entirety of the fantasy football playoffs, week 15 through 17. Some of them are a little bit of a repeat. So again, I will go over everything in the week 15 rankings collectively as well. But the first one, the Packers, is going to be absolutely amazing. I don't know why nobody's talking about them, likely because they do get a negative matchup against the Seahawks this week, where I wouldn't love to start them. If you need to, it's definitely an option. This defense is a lot better than people are giving them credit for, though. They're the number 13 defense in yards allowed to opposing offenses, despite having one of the tougher schedules in the entire NFL. They're 8th in total sacks per game. They're 9th in total points allowed, and the defense 5 on the year, which is a lot better than expected. They shouldn't be available in over 60% of leagues. I don't get how that's a thing. They have one of the better internal units as far as talent goes, and they have a pretty good coaching staff behind them, making them a pretty safe option, and they do get some home games in the fantasy playoffs. playoffs, which is going to be played in the cold, and they play absolutely amazing in the cold compared to other teams like the Dolphins from what we saw a few weeks ago, or warmer climate teams. But the Colts is going to be another option that we can go through and stash ahead of the playoffs. They do not get a great matchup this week against the Broncos. I would be avoiding them at all costs, to be completely fair with you. They get the Titans in week 16 and then the Giants in the Fantasy Football Championship game. That is the single best schedule as far as those last 2 weeks. Yes, they aren't the best internal unit again themselves. They are 15th in interceptions forced. They're 18th in sacks and pressure rate. It's not great, but when you look at who they're playing, Will Levis and Drew Lock are some of the most turnover-prone quarterbacks in their starting time in the NFL, with horrible offensive lines. Their QBRs are also absolutely terrible, and their offenses don't score a ton, so it's going to be a good spot for them. The Cardinals and the Falcons are also two stash-worthy defenses we can go over. I will talk about them very quickly because I will go over them again in the Week 15 rankings. I don't want you guys to miss that, but the Cardinals get the Patriots, Panthers, and Rams in their last 3 games. Not amazing matchups there in the back half of that stretch, but this defense is one that a lot of people are writing off a little bit earlier than they should. They have been performing a lot better in the second half of their season, all things considered. The Falcons do get the Raiders, Giants, and Commanders in their next 3. Again, not a defense with a great internal unit, but those first 2 matchups against the Raiders and Giants are absolutely amazing, too, where we do want to be starting them and stashing them for those 2 matchups. And also a quick note to keep in the back of your mind, some defenses that are really, really good in week 17. Maybe you don't want to add them now, but just be aware of them if you do advance a week or 2 into the fantasy playoffs. The Chargers are going to be one that has an absolute great matchup. The Dolphins are another one. These are 2 of the best defenses that are still on the waivers. The Chargers get the Patriots in that championship game. The Dolphins get the Browns. We already know we need to be hunting for those Browns matchups. Jameis Winston is the most turnover-prone quarterback in the entire NFL you could possibly ever get, so I would keep an eye on those guys if you do happen to advance. But here are my total defensive rankings coming into week 15. This is going to cover all of your bases for every defense that could possibly be out there for you. There are a lot of good defenses with very bad matchups. Keep that in mind. The Ravens, though, are going to be the number 1 defense. I probably can't remember the last time that we've had them number 1 total, because their defense isn't necessarily built for fantasy football, but in this week they get a matchup against the Giants and Drew Lock. That is definitely built for fantasy football points. The offensive line for the Giants is absolutely terrible. The Ravens are one of the best defenses at generating sacks. They have 41 on the year. The Giants have one of the worst turnover differentials as well. The Broncos defense is also going to be here in the S tier, number 2. They get a matchup against the Colts, another team that doesn't know how to hold on to the ball. They have over 20 turnovers this year, and they have Anthony Richardson at quarterback, which does not help their case. And the Broncos have a great internal unit as far as the defense themselves. They have Patrick Surtain in the secondary, who is one of the runners in Defensive Player of the Year. Do I think he's going to win it? No. He has been really good at stopping fantasy points to wide receivers, though. He's definitely top 3 in those votings, leaving Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman as the top 2 wide receivers, because he's going to take away Josh Downs if he is healthy in this matchup. Again, Anthony Richardson with those 2 wide receivers against a really good defense and secondary is going to be a little bit tough. The Broncos are leading the NFL in total sacks with 47, to pair with a very good secondary again in Patrick Surtain. They also are the defense 3 on the year for a reason, but dropping it down to the A tier here, we're going to have some other defenses like the Cardinals facing the Patriots, the Commanders that are getting the Saints, and then the Chiefs who are getting the Browns. Absolutely amazing options. All of these A tier defenses you need to be starting if you do have them. The Cardinals didn't perform against the Seahawks last week, but the Patriots are not in the same world as far as offensive efficiency goes. The Cardinals are forcing a turnover per week on average, and May is prone to throwing those interceptions. He's almost averaging a full interception a game. With the Commanders, again, they get Marshawn Lattimore back in this matchup. The Saints don't have anybody on offense to be scary and barely have a quarterback at that fact, and don't have Taysom Hill. The offense is very one-dimensional. And then with the Chiefs, they're a pretty good defense on their own. They're one of, if not the best run-stopping defenses in the NFL, and they get a matchup against Jameis Winston, again, the most turnover-prone quarterback. We're hunting that matchup every single time we can get it. That's one where I want to be starting them. But looking down into the B tier, we're going to drop it down. You can still start these defenses. They have a little bit more of red flags as far as matchups or internal units go, but still by far a great option for you. The Vikings and the Chargers are going to be here. The Vikings probably won't get the same version of the Bears that we saw last week against the 49ers. It was their first game with their interim head coach at Thomas Brown. He probably will improve a little bit, but even if he doesn't, the one bright spot of this Bears team is that they don't average a high turnover rate in the NFL. Unlucky for the Bears, but lucky for us in starting the Vikings, they force a ton of turnovers. They are number 1 in interceptions per game, 4th in sacks per game, and also 6th in points allowed to opposing offenses, the number 1 overall defense in the entire NFL as fantasy football wise goes. Caleb Williams will be in for a rough one. With such a bad offensive line and a really good pressure rate from the Vikings, I expect 1 turnover and about 6 sacks coming in this matchup here. Unfortunately though, Baker Mayfield has been underperforming without Chris Godwin, which is making this Chargers matchup a lot better. The only thing that he's really been able to stay consistent with is his turnovers. Out of all teams in the last 2 weeks, he threw 2 interceptions to the Raiders and then 2 to the Panthers. That's just not a good stretch. Those aren't necessarily amazing defenses that we should be worrying about. They're top 5 in sacks. They're top 5 in turnovers. This Chargers defense is one that's a lot better than those 2 they faced previously. It's a great spot to go ahead and start them. But moving it down to the C tier, we're going to have the Falcons and the Jets, 2 defenses that are struggling a little bit internally, but they have very positive matchups. So you have to be going through and starting them if you do need them. They both have pretty good spike weeks when it does happen, but also really big down weeks. Then we're going to be moving into the D tier. We have the absolute dart throws here with the Seahawks, Bengals, Jets, Texans, and Steelers. The Steelers are only this low because they get a really negative matchup against the Eagles. Then the last tier here, hopefully you don't have to go with any of these guys, but if you do, it's also another dart throw with the Bears, Rams, Packers, and Raiders. They get decent matchups. You can do that if you need it. The Packers is probably the best team that I'd go through in that matchup, but here's the kicker rankings everybody's been waiting for. Nobody goes through kicker rankings. I'm going to put them all up on the screen at once for you guys so you can screenshot it, look through it, do whatever you need to do. It's not too much besides matchup. Is the offense good? Do they get in the red zone? And hopefully they kick some field goals and actually make them. But that's going to finish it off for this video. I wish you all the best to advance another week into the fantasy football playoffs. I will see you guys in the next video coming tomorrow. All glory to the man above.